Iran is playing two very different games at the same time. At the diplomatic table, it's presenting itself as a nation willing to talk, willing to negotiate, willing to find common ground. But beneath the surface, quite literally, beneath the surface, it's setting up one of the most dangerous and calculated military traps in modern history. Right there in the dark, murky waters of the Strait of Hormuz, here's what happened. The Tehran regime submitted a ceasefire proposal through Pakistan. On the surface, that sounds like progress. It sounds like diplomacy working. But strip away the formalities, and what you're really looking at is a stalling tactic, a calculated move designed to ease the military pressure building around Iran while buying just enough time to reposition its most dangerous assets. Because while diplomats were exchanging messages, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was quietly doing something far more sinister in the waters below. They were deploying Ghadir-class stealth submarines, secretly, methodically, positioning them at the narrowest, most strategically critical choke points of the entire strait. And this wasn't accidental. This wasn't routine naval activity. This was a deliberate chess move, placing the most dangerous pieces on the most dangerous squares of the board before anyone could react. Now, let's talk about what these submarines are actually capable of, because this is where it gets genuinely alarming. These vessels can lay naval mines across the most heavily trafficked shipping corridor on the planet. They can ambush massive oil tankers that carry a significant portion of the world's daily energy supply. And most chillingly, they can launch direct attacks against United States naval assets operating in the region. These aren't loud, detectable machines either. They are built to be silent. It's built to sink to the seabed and simply wait. Motionless, engine off, invisible to sonar, lying in wait for hours at a time. Think about that image for a second. Time bombs, quietly resting on the ocean floor, right at the heart of the global energy corridor. That is exactly what Iran was positioning inside the Strait of Hormuz. But here's where the calculation went wrong for Tehran. The White House and the Pentagon were not about to fall for the same playbook that has been running on repeat for 47 years. The ceasefire proposal, the diplomatic overture, the so-called peace gesture, Washington saw straight through all of it. And the response wasn't a polite counteroffer. The response was overwhelming, immediate, and historically unprecedented in scale. The United States launched what can only be described as one of the largest naval blockades in modern history. Not a patrol, not a show of presence. A full-scale, iron-fisted blockade designed to do one thing above all else: find those submarines, neutralize Iran's underwater threat network, and lock down the Strait of Hormuz under American control. Leading this force was the USS George H.W. Bush aircraft carrier. Behind it, more than 20 heavily armed warships entered the strait in a formation that looked, from above, like a massive steel wall moving through water. The skies above were immediately saturated with patrol aircraft, reconnaissance flights, and fighter jets sweeping every inch of airspace. U.S. Air Force assets across the entire region were placed on full combat alert. Special operations teams were put on standby. This wasn't a defensive posture. This was the full weight of American military power being dropped onto one of the smallest but most strategically vital waterways on Earth. The backbone of this naval formation deserves special attention. Arleigh-Burke-class guided missile destroyers, including the USS John Finn and the USS Milius, sailed in tight formation just behind the carrier in the Arabian Sea. These are not just impressive ships. These are floating weapons platforms capable of engaging threats from the air, from the surface, and from beneath the water simultaneously. Accompanying the fleet was the USNS Carl Brashear, the logistical lifeline of the entire operation, a vessel whose job is to keep this enormous war machine fueled, supplied, and capable of staying at sea indefinitely without interruption. The main blockade line itself was drawn like a steel net, stretching between Ras Al Had in Oman and Iran's Chabahar border. The formation was so tight, so precisely arranged, that not a single vessel could pass through without explicit American permission. This was not a suggestion. This was a hard line drawn across one of the busiest shipping lanes on the planet. Out toward the horizon, San Antonio-class amphibious assault ships, including the USS New Orleans, vessels capable of carrying F-35 fighters, patrolled with full combat loads, ready at any moment to launch special operations missions. At the outermost edges of the blockade line, positioned in the shallow coastal waters closest to the Iranian shoreline, Independence-class littoral combat ships held their ground. These vessels were specifically designed for exactly this kind of environment: shallow, complex, contested water, and they were placed there for a very specific reason: to absorb the first blow, to stop Iran's short-range missiles and drone attacks before they could reach the main fleet, to serve as the outer wall of an impenetrable defensive perimeter. But if there is one asset in this entire formation that defines the balance of power in the Strait right now, it is the USS George H.W. Bush carrier itself. The F/A-18 Super Hornets launching from its deck are patrolling the sky around the clock, locked onto targets, ready to strike within seconds of receiving an order. These are not aircraft on a training exercise. These are combat-ready jets in a live operational environment, and their presence alone sends an unmistakable message. But beneath the water, the situation tells a completely different story. Iran's Ghadir submarines were there, lying in silence on the seabed, waiting. But what they were waiting for never came, because above them, the Americans had already begun their operations, and they were executing them with a level of precision that left no room for error. U.S. air power started targeting Iranian-flagged oil tankers with millimeter accuracy. As new targets appeared on radar screens inside combat operations centers, the tension escalated with every sweep of the clock. The procedure followed a strict, deliberate protocol. When an F/A-18 approached a targeted vessel, the pilot would first broadcast stern, unambiguous warnings over international radio frequencies. The Iranian captain would be given one final opportunity to change course, one last chance to turn the ship around and avoid what was coming. If that warning was ignored, if those captains held their course, the operation shifted instantly to lethal mode, and the strike authorization would be given without hesitation. Now here is a critical detail that reveals the sophistication and strategic thinking behind these operations. Every single vessel targeted was empty. No cargo, no oil. The United States made that calculation deliberately and carefully. Sinking loaded tankers in the Gulf would have created an ecological catastrophe of enormous proportions, a disaster that would have undermined the entire operation and handed Iran a massive propaganda victory. Washington wanted to strangle Iran's oil exports, not trigger an environmental crisis, so the targeting was surgical. Precise, controlled destruction with a very specific, contained objective. The first vessel to feel that precision was the massive, empty oil tanker MTC Star 3. Precision-guided munitions launched from F/A-18. Super Hornets found the tanker's smokestack with absolute accuracy, instantly destroying its engine systems. The strikes punched through the tanker's thick steel hull and delivered controlled, targeted destruction directly to the engine room, leaving the ship completely blind, completely deaf, and completely dead in the water. A lifeless metal hulk, drifting, going nowhere. The Mount Sevda tanker wasn't far behind. It met the same brutal fate. And just days before these strikes, another F/A-18 launched from the USS Abraham Lincoln had already set its sights on the Mount Hosna tanker. The approach was different this time. 20mm cannon rounds from the fighter jet systematically destroyed the tanker's rudder system, leaving the vessel entirely incapable of steering. With its rudder shredded, the ship was abandoned to the currents. Its journey to any Iranian port was finished before it began. The message across all three operations was identical. You will not reach your destination. Your ship will not be sunk. But it will not move, and it will not deliver. Surgical, controlled, unambiguous. Meanwhile, beneath the water's surface, Iran's waiting submarines could do nothing but listen. Lying on the seabed, as the U.S. Navy systematically dismantled the vessels above them, the Ghadir crews were powerless spectators to the hunting down of their own Navy's ships. The psychological impact of that alone, lying silent and invisible beneath your own destroyed fleet, must have been suffocating. Above the water, the scale of American dominance was now completely undeniable. 61 commercial vessels had been forced to change course in response to U.S. naval operations in the Strait. The Strait of Hormuz had been transformed. It was no longer a shared international waterway. It had become an American-controlled corridor forged of steel, fire, and absolute operational authority, where Washington's rules were the only rules that applied. And the core reason Washington assembled this level of force is becoming increasingly clear. The United States had almost certainly anticipated Iran's underwater strategy well in advance. Intelligence assessments had likely already wargamed the exact scenario of Ghadir submarines deploying quietly to seabed positions, while diplomats simultaneously made noise about peace proposals. Washington understood, possibly better than Tehran realized, that the ceasefire overture through Pakistan wasn't a genuine de-escalation signal. It was cover, operational cover for moving submarines into position before the window closed. So has the danger actually passed? Is the threat neutralized? Not even close. The Ghadir-class submarine program represents something fundamentally different from the kind of naval threat the U.S. typically faces. These are not the massive, deep-water nuclear submarines of traditional great power competition. They are something far more adapted to the specific geography of this region. At just 29 meters long and weighing only 125 tons, they are compact, shallow water predators specifically engineered for environments like the Strait of Hormuz. Their origin story is telling. These vessels were developed by reverse engineering North Korea's Yono-class designs, some of the most stripped-down, asymmetric underwater weapons ever built. They represent the absolute cutting edge of what military strategists call asymmetric warfare, using small, cheap, and simple tools to threaten large, expensive, and complex ones. The crew compartment fits exactly 7 people. 7 people! Crammed into a claustrophobic iron hull, operating without natural light for days at a time. This is not comfortable warfare. This is a vessel built for one purpose: to lie undetected beneath enemy shipping lanes and wait for an opportunity to strike. The diesel-electric propulsion system is specifically designed to blend acoustically into the background noise generated by the enormous propellers of commercial ships passing overhead. To us sonar systems, a sitting Ghadir on the seabed looks like a rock formation or a dense school of fish. It looks like nothing. It looks like the bottom. The geography of the Strait of Hormuz amplifies this threat dramatically. The average depth of the strait is only around 36 meters. That is an absolute nightmare for giant nuclear attack submarines that are optimized for deep-water operations. The same shallow depth that limits American nuclear submarines is quite literally the Ghadir's ideal operating environment. Add to that the complex thermal layers that shift constantly with temperature, the strong and unpredictable bottom currents, and the sudden changes in water salinity near the seabed, all of which scatter and confuse even the world's most advanced sonar systems. And you have a hiding environment that is as close to perfect as these submarines could ask for. And the weapons load on these vessels makes the threat very real. The Ghadir carries Volfier heavy torpedoes and JASCT, submarine-launched cruise missiles, both capable of striking billion-dollar U.S. destroyers with catastrophic effect. The operational tactic is elegantly simple and genuinely dangerous. Sink to the bottom, shut down every non-essential system to conserve battery power, switch to passive listening mode, and wait. Just wait. For hours, days if necessary, until the right ship passes directly overhead. The danger in Hormuz has not disappeared. It has simply gone quieter. The United States is not sitting still in response to this. The Navy is preparing to deploy some of the most sophisticated anti-submarine warfare capabilities ever assembled in a single operational theater. The P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft operating above the strait are continuously seeding the water below with sonobuoys, building an invisible electronic detection grid that covers every meter of the seabed. These sonobuoys listen for anything, the faintest mechanical vibration, the barely perceptible hum of a battery-powered motor, the tiny acoustic signature of a hull creaking under pressure. At the surface level, Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers are towing array sonars behind them. Long, sensitive acoustic sensors dragged through the water column that can detect mechanical sounds and propeller noise from kilometers away. MH-60 Seahawk helicopters launched from those same destroyers are systematically working the strait with dipping sonars, lowering sensor arrays directly into the water at precise intervals, essentially performing an acoustic X-ray of every cubic meter of the strait, section by section. Meanwhile, unmanned surface vessels are conducting continuous mapping operations with AI-assisted acoustic systems building a real-time picture of the seabed's acoustic landscape with precision that has never been possible before. Every anomaly, every vibration, Every shadow on the sonar picture is transmitted to the command center immediately and automatically. Nothing gets filtered. Nothing gets delayed. The system is designed to catch what human operators might miss. And somewhere beneath all of this, Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines are operating in the darkness, the most lethal underwater hunting machines ever built, listening with extraordinary patience to everything around them. The moment a Gadir submarine makes a single detectable mistake, the moment it activates a system, shifts position, or produces the smallest identifiable acoustic signature, the response will be immediate. Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes from the air, or Mark 48 heavyweight torpedoes from the depths, can end the existence of a Gadir submarine in seconds. But submarines are only one layer of Iran's asymmetric strategy. The Revolutionary Guard has built a multi-layered threat architecture across the strait. And every layer is designed with the same core philosophy: not to win a conventional battle against the United States, because everyone in Tehran knows that is not possible, but to bleed the Americans to exhaust them. To raise the operational and political cost of maintaining a presence in the strait to levels that become unsustainable over time. Hundreds of fast attack boats belonging to the Revolutionary Guard are positioned along the Iranian coastline right now. These aren't ordinary vessels. They're built with fiberglass hulls, specifically engineered to minimize radar cross-section. It's camouflaged in coastal caves, fishing shelters, and hidden coves carved into the rugged Iranian shoreline. Armed with heavy machine guns, shoulder-fired rockets, and light anti-ship missiles, they are designed to operate as a swarm, dozens or hundreds launching simultaneously. Overwhelming U.S. Aegis air defense systems with so many simultaneous threats that statistically at least one gets through. That's the doctrine. It's not to win. To force one missile through. To get one hit on one hull. To demonstrate that no American ship is completely untouchable. As President Trump himself has stated, American warships can pass through Hormuz without taking damage from Iranian attacks. And the military reality backs that up. The layered defensive systems on U.S. Navy vessels, from Aegis combat systems to close-line weapons platforms, are extraordinarily capable. Iran knows this, which is why the attack boat swarm tactic is ultimately psychological as much as it is military. It's about forcing constant vigilance, constant expenditure of defensive resources, constant operational stress. The Shait-type kamikaze drones add another layer to this problem. These unmanned aerial vehicles are programmed to fly low, minimize their radar signature, and dive directly into the radar antennas and bridge superstructures of U.S. warships. They don't need to sink the ship, just need to degrade it, to put systems offline, to create cascading failures that reduce a warship's effectiveness. The Phalanx close-line weapons systems on American destroyers capable of firing thousands of rounds per second are specifically configured to handle exactly this threat. But managing drone swarms in a complex electromagnetic environment while simultaneously tracking submarine contacts and fast attack boats is a demanding operational challenge. Then there are the mines. Thousands of them, sitting in Iranian arsenals right now. Contact mines, magnetic mines, acoustic mines, all capable of being deployed overnight across the narrowest passages of the strait. If Iran chose to execute a full-scale mining operation, the Strait of Hormuz could become effectively impassable for commercial shipping within hours. And here's what makes that scenario particularly catastrophic. It wouldn't even require sinking a ship. If a single oil tanker struck a single mine anywhere in the strait, insurance giants like Lloyd's of London would almost certainly suspend all maritime coverage for the region immediately. The moment that happens, the commercial shipping industry grinds to a halt regardless of what any navy does. No tanker captain sails into uninsured waters. No shipping company authorizes that voyage. The strait closes itself. The downstream consequences of that scenario extend across the entire global economy. Asia's industrial supply chains, the factories and assembly lines that produce the goods flowing into every market on Earth, require consistent, reliable energy. Europe's winter heating reserves are replenished through this corridor. The interruption of Hormuz traffic, even temporarily, would send shockwaves through energy markets, supply chains, and financial systems simultaneously. Iran understands this leverage completely, and the Revolutionary Guard's coastal missile batteries constantly repositioning along the shoreline. Pointing their barrels toward the sea, are a continuous reminder that Tehran hasn't forgotten how to use it. The United States is preparing its electronic warfare response. EA-18G Growler aircraft are operating over the strait, systematically jamming Iranian coastal radar installations and flooding their communication frequencies with electromagnetic interference. Iran's ability to coordinate coastal defense assets, communicate between its vessels and shore commands, and build an accurate operational picture of the U.S. fleet is being degraded continuously by these operations. Meanwhile, the Phalanx CIWS systems on American destroyers are locked and ready, configured to automatically engage incoming drone threats without human delay. Behind all the visible force is a deep operations infrastructure that rarely makes headlines. The MV Ocean Trader, the floating forward base for U.S. Special Operations teams, is positioned at Diego Garcia and ready for immediate deployment. If orders come through to escalate, SEAL teams are already working updated plans that include infiltrating Iranian port facilities, sabotaging coastal missile systems from within, and covertly boarding critical Iranian naval vessels. These aren't contingency plans dusted off from a shelf. These are living operational documents being updated in real time. And through all of this, the economic dimension continues to accelerate the pressure on Tehran. The U.S. blockade is costing Iran an estimated $500 million per day in lost oil export revenue. That number is not sustainable for any economy, let alone one already under years of accumulated sanctions pressure. The political consequences inside Iran are increasingly difficult to manage. The radical wing of the Revolutionary Guard is applying direct, intense pressure on regime leadership to strike back, to launch a direct military confrontation before the economic hemorrhage becomes fatal. And that internal pressure, more than any single military asset, may be the most dangerous variable in this entire situation. A regime under existential economic pressure, with hardline internal factions demanding escalation, cornered militarily, but still possessing enormous destructive capability. That is the most unpredictable environment for rational decision-making that exists in international relations. The risk is not necessarily that Iran executes a brilliant strategic plan. The risk is that someone inside the system makes a desperate, irrational move, a suicide strike that triggers a chain reaction nobody can stop. If that chain reaction begins, Washington's response will not be proportional. U.S. military planning has already mapped out the full spectrum scenario. A comprehensive preemptive strike doctrine targeting all Iranian coastal infrastructure simultaneously. Every naval base in Bandar Abbas, every missile facility on Keshem Island, every submarine shelter in the region, every coastal battery pointing toward the strait, Tomahawk cruise missiles from the surface fleet, strike packages from carrier aircraft, potentially be two Spirit stealth bombers flying undetected from Diego Garcia or the U.S. mainland, all converging on the same targets within the same operational window. Those B-2s carry GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, the largest conventional bombs in the American arsenal, specifically engineered to destroy hardened underground facilities, the kind of facilities Iran has spent decades building deep into mountain rock to protect its most sensitive missile and nuclear infrastructure. If this scenario activates, those mountains no longer provide the protection they were designed to offer. What we are watching unfold in the Strait of Hormuz right now is not a routine regional military standoff. It is something far larger, far more consequential, and far more dangerous than the headlines typically convey. This is a direct confrontation between a 47-year, asymmetric military doctrine built patiently, layer by layer, specifically to challenge American naval supremacy in this geography in what may be the United States' final comprehensive strategic response to that doctrine. The outcome will not just determine who controls the Strait of Hormuz. It will redraw the power architecture of the entire Middle East for decades. Every navy in the world is watching how shallow water stealth submarines perform against the most advanced anti-submarine warfare systems ever deployed in an operational theater. Every adversary state is watching whether asymmetric drone swarms, mining threats, and fast-tack boat tactics can impose real costs on the U.S. Navy. Now, every American ally is watching whether Washington's deterrence still means something when tested at its limits. The fuse is lit. It's burning. And right now, the only question that matters is how much shorter it gets before someone makes a move that cannot be taken back. So let us know what you think. Do you believe the U.S. Navy will strike first against Iran's invisible underwater threat network before it can be fully activated? Or does Iran's layered asymmetric strategy have the potential to drag the strait into a prolonged, grinding naval conflict, one that could shake the global economy to its foundations and last for years? Drop your perspective in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more of this content on the move, we're on Spotify. The full video versions are there whenever you need them. Thank you for being here.